Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Rooting for Change. We're going to explore today how you can support community action for the environment. I'll be your host. I'm Alex Robinson, the CEO of Hubbub. And this is the fourth in our series of breakfast events. They're all designed to support you engage with the public and change behaviours crucially around sustainability. So this session is being recorded. We'll share a link to watch it so you can listen back or share with your colleagues if there's anything that comes up that you're particularly interested in. I should also say that this Zoom is kind of broadcast style, but I promise you this is a live event. We have a live audience and there's a chat box at the bottom. So please do drop your name in and where you're joining us from so everyone can see who's here. It will be quite a snappy 50-minute long session today. I'm going to ask our panelists some questions to warm them up and get things started. And then it's over to you, the audience, for a Q&A. You will find a Q&A box at the bottom. It's separate to the chat box, where you can put questions in and you can also vote for the questions that other attendees have put in. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panelists for the day. First of all, we have Susie Duke, Community Work Consultant. Susie is a grassroots community activist who set up the Community Work Consultancy to support community development and partnerships. She's also the project lead of Park Village Oasis, which is part of a Hubbub project called Breaking Ground and uses her platform to pursue social and climate justice. Welcome, Susie. We also have Sotos Chowdhury, who is Director of Communities and Networks at Friends of the Earth. Sotos has spent his career organising and campaigning with working class communities, people of colour, and people living in de-industrialised areas. He led organising at Amnesty International UK, the Labour Party, and other civil society organisations and alliances, among much else. And last but not least, we have Emily King, who's our communities lead at Hubbub. With 15 years experience in campaigning and organising, Emily now leads Hubbub's work with communities. She's passionate about the power of collective action, inclusivity in the environmental movement and climate justice, particularly for UK communities feeling the worst effects of climate change, but less likely to be causing it. So welcome all. I'm going to go straight into our questions. Susie, I'm going to come to you first. What ways have you seen communities come together to tackle environmental issues?
So this is an interesting question because my experience comes from the most diverse borough in the UK, which is Newham. And there has been a particular problem with, for example, fly tipping and littering. So I've seen communities come together to tackle that. And that's really been around clearing up, but also an education program so that people can understand where to put their stuff if they want to get rid of it, how to do that in an environmentally friendly way, and to do that in a way that doesn't upset the community. We've also seen some circular economy type of environmental action in the form of pre-loved groups. So there is a very great need for people to be able to afford things, for example, school uniforms, children's toys and things like that, etc. And there are networks out there that I have seen building communities, not physically face to face, but online, to be able to do this kind of swapping. And of course, in terms of reducing the need for food packaging and the transportation of fresh fruit that loses its healthy qualities, we've seen a lot of gardens spring up to support people in growing food and being able to use it. So that, I would say those are the three main things.
Brilliant. Thank you, Susie. We might come back to some of those ideas later on as well. Soto, same question to you.
Cool, thank you. Where I grew up is actually just down, is the next borough down from where Susie's talking about, is Tower Hamlets, and actually it's a heavily concreted and sort of bricked up area, heavily built up. I basically, up until my early 30s, whichever window, wherever I lived in multiple places, would only see concrete or bricks. And actually that meant lots of people were like, yearning for green space. And my mum has actually worked with the local TMO and actually started plotting and planting and pottering all across the sort of estate that we grew up in. And whether that means just outside of people's homes or whether that means a bunch of women have essentially taken over one of the football pitches. There was a couple of football pitches that were concreted over and they put planters in there. And now it's, essentially become a communal space, which isn't just for younger people, but like people of all ages running into do lots of things and connect with people. So that's like one way people can do things in a local community sense. But luckily, we worked at Friends of the Earth, where actually on the other end, when people have wanted to do more political and campaigning type actions, sometimes you're interested, so you go to an organization like that for it to serve as a vehicle for things you're interested in. So like the Climate Change Act is like a really a big example of how communities up and down the country got together to lobby for a piece of legislation that was like the first in the world in terms of a Climate Change Act, which has then spread all over the world. So there's that. And then there's other examples like fracking. So you might not have known that you were interested until somebody, a terrible company comes and proposes to do a terrible thing in your community. And then you sort of band together, get supported, you work with experts and other communities and other people that were activists or didn't know that they had to become activists, and you come together to prevent a bad thing. Multiple ways in which people get involved. And I would say some of it is the local achievable stuff, and some of it is like you need a little bit of an imagination, you need to band together with other people to get it going.
Brilliant, thank you. And finally, to you, Emily.
Thanks, Alex. So just to reiterate really what Susie and Sotas have said, for the communities I've worked alongside, environmental issues aren't really separate from other issues they're facing. So they're both really about use of resources. So a lot of communities find ways to multi-solve, which means that their response to food poverty might be reducing food waste by collecting and sharing surplus, or setting up a garden to grow food. And they do that in ways that are environmentally positive. So for example, collecting water for the community gardens and sharing and reusing resources, as Susie described. So, and in that way, some people in the community are motivated by the positive environmental impact as a priority. And some people are more motivated by need for food or green space to use, as Sotes was saying. So I think for me, it's like the working together itself is the way that I see communities tackling environmental issues, collectively coming together to create those solutions to the issues they're facing, be it social or environmental, and then taking action in that way. Mostly, the communities will have both environmental and social benefits to their action.
Brilliant, thank you, Emily. And I guess, that environmental and social divide, which we talk about kind of intellectually, doesn't necessarily exist on the ground so much, right? Yeah. Okay, great, thank you. So, one thing I should just say, I've just discovered that the chat function isn't working, so I apologize about that. Please do use the Q&A to put questions in for our panelists. We'll be coming to those shortly. Okay, so I'd love to hear one piece of advice that you would give someone who wants to help their community take climate action. Sotos, I'll come to you first.
Cool, thanks. So if we just follow on from what Emily was saying in terms of like lots of people don't actually separate these different types of issues and there's ways in which to intersect them, then you sort of go, forget the climate bit, forget the environment bit, and you've got action. And everyone just on the call, just think about like who is quite good at making you do something and how do they do it? And so your role, the thing you have to do when you're trying to convince people is either convince people, compel people, agitate.
Oh, I've just lost Sotos' sound. Can you hear Sotos?
Agitate people.
And
how you don't the thing don't. Can you hear me?
Sotos, we lost you. I think you're back.
Am I back now?
You're back now. You were talking about I think when you went up, it was when the different types of ways you could inspire people to
Correct.
act, agitate, compel, etc.
And persuade, and don't belittle what people are doing. Like, if they're doing something that you don't think is right, that's fine. That's totally fine. That's the thing that they believe in. So you're not meant to make them feel like they're being compromised or that they're being belittled, but actually being energized and challenged into something else. And yeah, always think about those people that are quite good at convincing other people to get into something that they never expected, and genuinely follow that. Like, I use that application for any type of issue. I don't think any issue requires a different human response. And I think that's where it is. I just center it around the human and what makes the human tick and move and act.
Quick follow-up question?
Yeah, go for it.
That's a really interesting answer. Do you think that those people who are good at inspiring other people to act have something in common? And if so, what is it?
Such a good question. So I think broadly, yes, which is like probably a bit of patience and a really good relational ability. So like, what you are as human beings for thousands and thousands of years are creatures that sit with other creatures, right? And trying to understand them, right? Our conflicts is when we don't understand each other, and our community is when we sort of bond over an agreed amount of certain things. That doesn't mean tensions don't agree. And the folks that I'm talking about, the sort of organizers and leaders of the world, they sort of go, we are not going to get everyone agreed on everything, but there's a bunch of things we can get you agreed on and to do something together. And I think that requires a little bit of patience. So sometimes what you often have is somebody runs up to you and says, sign this petition now, or go to this protest now. And people are a bit further away from that, right? And the organizer sort of gently brings them into it, or selects the right time to go, actually, would you want to come along with me? If not, how about there's this other thing? And you sort of bring them in. What you don't do is make people feel bad for not joining right now, but you make them feel good about the time that they will be joining.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Emily, same question to you, one piece of advice.
Yeah, so thanks, Alex. So yeah, very similar to SOTES, but in kind of practical terms, I would say someone that wants to help their community to take climate action is to go out and talk to their neighbours. Take 5 minutes first to work out like what your vision for your community is, and then go and share it with people that you live nearby in a conversation over a cup of tea. So this will help you find out what other people are motivated by, as SOTES was saying, and what issues they want to tackle, and start to identify that common ground that you can work together on. But essentially, it really starts to build those all-important relationships that, as SOTES just described, they are the things that will help you get organised to take action over the issues that you all care about, where that common ground is. And if you don't know your neighbours yet, there will be likely to be something going on in your community that you can piggyback on. So a bit of research into other meetings, other events that you can go along to, coffee mornings, etc., and meet people there. But I would really advise starting with kind of talking to people, building those relationships, and then going from there.
Brilliant, thank you, Emily. So I'm picking up themes of listening to people and building common ground. Susie?
This is such an interesting question, because I have been doing community engagement and activism for about 10 years now. And to cut right to the chase and come to where we are today, one of the most effective things I have seen as a member of the community as an activist is go to partners and stakeholders that have power. So if you look at you've got the Paris Agreement, it's all been filtered down into a local plan within the councils, and from that have come departments that are specifically there to help communities to do things. So for example, the Climate Action Department is looking for communities to do work with. They have the resources, they have funds, they have marketing ability, and they have the ability to empower you to do something. They will also introduce you to other networks that will help support your community. And that is a really low-hanging fruit and a very quick win. So that's my advice.
Thanks, Susie. And so quick follow-up question to that. For those people who might be a bit nervous or unsure where to start approaching people in positions of influence, how would you go about that?
If you're a nervous person, go to your library. There are people specifically there whose role is to support you in accessing information. If you're somebody who's very IT literate and quite happy to go and do a deep dive on the computer, go onto your council's website and find their local strategic plan. That will give you all sorts of information. And another really good source of information is your local councillor, who is there to support you in leveraging what the council can offer. So those are 3 good ways.
Brilliant. That's so helpful. Thank you, Susie. Okay, so I've got my last pre-prepared question. I'm going to need someone in the audience to be brave enough to be the first one to post a question in the Q&A. So please step up. I'm sure some of the things you've been hearing here have sparked some thoughts and questions in your mind. So please do. Otherwise, you're going to be hearing a lot from me over the next little while. Okay, so last question from me, or perhaps last question from me. For organisations that want to support communities through an environmental project, but perhaps haven't built that muscle yet, how should they get started? Emily, you do plenty of this. I'm going to come to you first.
Thanks, Alex. So you might start to detect a theme here, but I would say always start with listening. It's really important to find ways to bring a community together, give them the floor, go out into the community and talk to people. The communities that an organisation might want to support will know what help they need to get going. So I would say an organisation just needs to find ways of listening to that. And really understanding that community perspective and what they need. But I think also importantly, just listening isn't enough. So as an organisation, you need to also commit to acting on what you hear and what the communities tell you that they need and want. So that involves giving assurances of how you will turn that listening into action, and being transparent about the next steps and keeping people informed along the way about what you are doing with the things that they told you about and how you're using that to support them to run environmental projects. And this means also kind of working out carefully different ways of working that might differ in style from perhaps a more corporate world that your organisation might be used to, and taking action to adapt to working in a way that is more typical in a community setting. The issues you encounter running projects are different in a community setting, right from, for example, like setting up applications for a grant fund through to monitoring and evaluation. And really you should be led by what the community tells you works for them, because then that will set up any community project for success, and rather than unintentionally put barriers in place that are possibly unnecessary, you're taking the lead from how a community works best.
Brilliant, thanks, Emily. And it makes so much sense, doesn't it? Because almost all organisations would say that they were unique in some way. So it makes sense that the communities that they support would be unique and have individual requirements too. Sotes, same question to you. How should organisations get started who want to support environmental projects with communities?
Sure. So following on actually from what Susie and Emily have said in their previous sort of contributions. So I'd say it's 2 words to think about. It's building energy. So it's the energy you are trying to harness and organize. And the other bit is imagination. So if you were to track it in between with ambition, so if you were a newcomer to like environmental action, then people's ambition might be something not that big, or it could be something huge. Like lots of people come into activism, want to change the world, so they've got big ambitions. So you have to provide the energy and you have to provide the sort of space to be able for people to build that, but also imagination, not your imagination, their imagination. So often organizations want to fit people into particular boxes, and actually you have to release that and you have to go, what in your world, how is it that you believe that you could change things? How could it be really different for you? Tiny example, going back to our first question, you know, the estate that I grew up in, there used to be rules where the previous tenants management associations organization used to say, don't put plants there, don't do this, don't put murals, blah, blah, blah. Now they don't say any of that. So people have plant potters all across their sort of ledges. So it's greened up a lot and people just feel like, oh, I can put these things wherever I kind of want. In the same way, if you see sort of Banksies, I'm sure there's council policies that say, oh, you're not allowed to have that class that has graffiti and paint all over it. But actually, the moment you leave it there, it creates a different space, creates a tourist attraction. People are excited, people are curious. Then like, oh, I want to do that in mine. In the same way, like taking that to a different, so not extreme, but like a different level, lots of climate activists who've been part of this sort of scene for years and years eventually got to the point where like, we want the climate change app. And what organizations have to do is facilitate that imagination. And remember, it's not just your imagination as the organization. Very likely you are going to be part of the thing that holds people back. If one of the things you insist on is where we must meet and we must make sure and we must meet again, well, that kind of bores people and drains the energy. And remember, that's the other push-pull factor, right? You have to build energy towards things. And there was a quick thing that Susie said, which actually is part of that energy, is like, you have to make sure it's winnable, like in some way, right? And you have to articulate that for people. So if they feel like what they're doing is moving things along, then they'll stay. If they feel like what they're doing has no point, they'll be fairly irritated, annoyed, and swiftly make an exit. And the worst people are not the worst people, but the most difficult people become those that really cared and then are stuck because they can't win and they can't work out what's going on. So then they stay and they're the most demotivated. And you just need to make sure in an organization, your point is to never have those people feeling like that by the end of it. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, that's so interesting. There's something about building energy and momentum in there that feels really important. Susie, I want to come to you with that question too.
Thank you. Before I give my answer, it really resonated with me what Sotes has just said, because I really didn't understand that I was important. I really didn't understand that the community is important, and really didn't understand the power we have. And it's actually taken the entire Breaking Ground project for me to understand that. And even today, I'm still a little bit in shock that people actually want to listen to us, as a community.
And Susie, could you just explain what Breaking Ground is as well for people who aren't aware?
Sure. So we had from my perspective, we had a derelict piece of land that's been unused, unloved for about 30 years in our area. And we were looking for some way of getting that to be useful for the community. So we were in touch with Breaking Ground, and it was all a very serendipitous process. And essentially what Breaking Ground were offering us is an opportunity to be able to use that land to help build community in the pursuit of climate and social justice. They gave us funds to be able to do that in terms of community engagement. They helped us to liaise with different partners, so with Newham Council and other different partners, and they gave us a mentor to support us because, listen, I'm a little housewife who sits at home with all these great big ideas, but I'm not empowered to do anything. And that's what Hubbub's Breaking Ground project did. It suddenly gave me the propulsion to be able to do something and all the support that comes with it. A very, very impressive program. So yeah, that's what Breaking Ground is for us, and it's a continuation of that. It's become something that's everybody. It's a name that everybody knows, everybody understands, and even though our term with the actual setup of that project ended, people still recognise that they are the OGs of the Breaking Ground project here in Newham. I'm very proud of it. It's amazing.
Brilliant, thank you.
That question.
Yeah, it does. It does. The OGs of the Breaking Ground project. I love that. And perhaps the chat's not working, but perhaps we can put a link to Breaking Ground in the Q&A as just a workaround, because I think it brings it to life. There's a brilliant video that you're featured in, Susie, as well. Okay, great. So I'm going to move on to the question from the.
Can I just give you my answer?
Oh, yeah, go on. Sorry, yeah, of course. Yeah, go on.
So excited about Breaking Ground, I forgot that. I think I want to give you some very practical advice. The first thing you need to understand is, what is the profile of your community? I can tell you now that if you're looking at a community that's worried about where am I going to get my next food from, or made up of refugees that live on £8 a week, environmental issues are not going to be top of their mind. Climate is not going to be top of their mind. So you really need to profile the community that you're targeting. You need to do a needs assessment. It's much easier to answer a need that exists than to try and create one. And the way I did that was I went round door knocking, doing surveys, getting people together to talk about what was the problem in the community. Whatever that need is and the way you're going to respond to it, your response must be compelling. And shall I just tell you how to make it compelling? Provide
Yes.
some food, get a bit of entertainment, and make sure the kids are catered for. And you will get droves of people coming in because people love to eat, they love a bit of music and they want their kids catered for. But in the background, that's going to be something that's going to bring people in. But that's going to give you an opportunity to talk to people about the things that are, that your initiative is about. From that, you see, walking away from that is a real loss of opportunity. At that point, you're going to have the opportunity to get onto the local networks. For example, Nextdoor is very area specific. You're going to be able to get onto local WhatsApp groups or get people who are on them to engage. You're going to be able to get a load of numbers and create a WhatsApp group for that specific initiative. You don't want to lose that. That's what you're trying to get at the end of your initiative, to be able to then move forward with the initiative. And I think it's really important that when you're doing that, you find the people that are going to be your community leaders. They are like gold dust. And they're going to be the ones that are really engaging and making a little bit of noise at the events. Those are the people that you're really going to need on the ground to spur your project forward. Hope that helps.
Brilliant. It does. Thank you, Susie. And actually, it's a neat segue perhaps into one of the questions in the Q&A that caught my eye. This one's from Natalie Ibbott. And so they ask, what ways have you found work best for approaching different groups within communities, or groups that work with communities, and to be accepted by them so you can get your messages and support? So if I understand this right, it's about, if you're perhaps coming from the outside, how do you then build the trust and acceptance to engage authentically and effectively with communities? Sophie, I'll come to you first.
Sure. This is something I've spent a lot of my life doing. I'd be in pit villages as a East Ender, born and raised in the East End, being in pit villages in the North, talking to people. And I think the two things: one, knowing you're not from there, reminding yourself of that, but showing to people that you really want to be there. So often what people have is a bad experience of people swanning in. What's the word? Swanning in, and then swanning out. Like there's sort of, here's a project, boom, 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 and then I'm out. And people have built up experiences of lots of these things. And actually, the person who hangs around and the person who continuously takes an interest, even after the project's gone, they are remembered. And they are seen as an ally, somebody that they can pick up the phone to. And that makes a difference. So again, it's that theme that we've been building on about relationship, right? Like when you're there to build a relationship, not just the project, things completely change for you. So that's like that I feel like is really important. The second one is also about expectations. If you can't do a whole bunch of things, you have to tell people right at the start. And if you can do them later on, you have to manage the expectations, because often when you ask people what do you want, you're going to hear in a particular community a bunch of things, and some of it will sound like I want a new sports stadium to somebody saying I just want some, I just want that disused piece of land to be used. Some things are much more achievable, and some things require a much bigger plan and resources. So being really honest with what you're able to do and building from that is really, really, really important. The other thing to get communities on side, and here's a really interesting one. If you want a group on side, get one group on side first. I know that sounds a bit like you're saying something really obvious, but people like being part of things that look like they're growing. And if you are pitching an idea, but no one seems to be in the tent with you, then it doesn't look like it's going to go nowhere. So the more people you bring, the more that come along with it. So like really think about that first sort of not to frame people as or groups as low hanging, but saying what would be a really important group to work with first to build from, and that often works wonders.
That's such great hard gained experience, Soto. Thank you. Emily, I'm going to ask if you have any insight on this question as well.
Yeah, so similarly to Sotez in the kind of bringing in a group, so you've got someone on board that you can then build on. I think I would look to, and we did this in Breaking Ground as well, kind of really get a key person in the community that you've built that relationship with. They really understand what you're trying to achieve, and then they can, they're a trusted voice then in the community. They can go and spread kind of the message about what you're trying to do and where the support is. And so really an example of how we did that in the Breaking Ground project was we had an original pilot project called Greener Together that just happened to be in Newham as well. And we had a community member there, Billy, who was working on the Greener Together project, who was really pivotal to that project and was great. So we brought her in to then work into Hubbub to work on the Breaking Ground project. So she had direct kind of lived experience of being a community member and setting up and running a project that we wanted to try and replicate in other areas. So having her on board was a really kind of a shortcut for us to build that community trust, because she could talk to them from a really authentic place. So I think as an organisation as well, it's like looking for as Sota said, the groups, but also the individuals that have got a similar motivation, want to achieve what you want to achieve, and focusing on that relationship, and then they will do a lot of the kind of sales job for you.
Brilliant, thank you, Emily. And shout out to Billy as well. Don't know if she's with us today. I'm going to move on and we've got a few minutes left for Q&A. So if you do have a question that's popped up, do drop it in. I want to come to this question. Actually, I'm going to fuse a couple of the questions. One from Abby Malburn, and it's about, or the second half is about the methods you found to work best working with communities, but also, have any methods been unsuccessful gaining community insight, or let's say engaging with communities as well? And one of the other questions here is about barriers. So what do you think the kind of common mistakes are, or the barriers to look out for, perhaps for people who haven't done this all that much, and that could be an easy trap to fall into? It might be something that you've experienced yourself as well. Susie, you're looking pensive. I'm going to come to you first.
Yes, I'm really not coming at it from an organisational perspective, but someone that's received organisational support. I think one of the dangers is that there's an assumption that the person who is community side leading a project is proficient at doing that, has experience, and it knows what they're doing. I don't think that's always the case. I think one of the biggest, hardest lessons I've learned is that you can't do it all yourself. It's really important that you are supported in creating a team, and that team feels as empowered and as valuable as your sponsor has made you feel. Because once you have that, then there's a lot of ability to do a lot of things, move a lot of pieces, which you couldn't possibly do on your own. And I would say, had that not happened, with the support of Hubbub, this Park Village Oasis would have failed, because at some point I would have had a nervous breakdown, because it's a lot, so that would be my advice, to make sure that you don't work on your own, because you can't do it all.
Thank you, Susie. Emily?
So I think some of the things that kind of we learned really early on are that not having that person behind what you're trying to do doesn't work. So just pinging out lots of surveys and leaflets through doors, and not having that personal interaction in a community that you want to try and support or work alongside or work with to do a project. So I think that would be one kind of takeaway. It's like start with the relationships and the personal interactions and build on that. But also, I think another really important one is that to recognise the time investment that people are putting into this. So you may have a community where people are volunteering for these projects because they want to achieve something in their particular neighbourhood. But they might also be up against like other multiple pressures that makes it, that's quite a big ask sometimes for people to give up their time. So I would always look for ways like that we can either remunerate that, or there are kind of incentives to recognise that the time of people in a community is as valuable as anyone else's time involved in a project. And I think particularly working with organisations, that's sometimes quite important to assert. And that people will volunteer because they want to see change and something good in their community, but entirely basing the structure of a project on people giving up their time for free can be really difficult for some communities that are under multiple pressures.
Yes, that's a great tip. Thank you, Emily. So Tez.
Really quickly, so I think, look, like having objectives that people work on that they're really clear on is good. Setting them really early is bad, especially if an organisation sets it for a community. And by this I mean, like if there's a centralised organisation says we want communities to do X, and let's use a current example like general elections, young people voting. Everyone always knows millions of young people don't vote, and everyone sort of does activity but never tries to work out what's actually going on. And what's actually going on is different young people are at different places. They're thinking about what's going on in the world in different ways. And it goes back to that persuading, compelling, agitating people sort of thing. And you need to use different things, but how you get there is different. So the idea might be obvious, but how you get there is different. And you need to spend a bit of time working out which community am I working with and why is it that they don't vote? Why is it that they're not taking action? And then from there, set your objectives. I used to do lots of organizing around housing before, and people, you knock on an individual door and they'll be like, well, the biggest issue that I've got in my property is mold. That's true. You knock on enough houses, then you realize, no, the biggest issue you have was you had a poorly designed building that's being poorly maintained by a council or by a housing association. So suddenly it changes and your target changes. So, but that only comes after a certain amount of conversations and you sort of be really plugged into what's happening in that community. And it could be really different if it was all private landlords. It could be a particular leak or a pipe or whatever it was, right? So like taking the time to assess what is a joint sort of key objective result, like with the community and the organization, is far better than having an early one that you might never end up meeting.
That's interesting too. All right, I'm going to do one. There's one quick question that I thought was intriguing this is from an anonymous attendee. When working with community groups, what's the most common feedback that you hear in terms of something that's working well for them or something that's a continuous challenge? So I guess this is themes that emerge from community engagement. I'm going to let whoever is ready step in first.
I'll give you a really funny one, right? So remember this, communities are also just big gossip groups at the worst, and are also like beautiful places of solidarity and power at the best. And so, one piece of feedback you often get when you're involving lots of people together is feedback about other people in the group. So that's like a really interesting one that you have to work out, right? Like, so you have to always remember that as an organization, you might be viewing you working with a homogenous community, this mosque in this area, but they're actually just built of lots of different people from different places. And they're thinking about, oh, we've never been involved with that group, or we don't like this group, or, previously we had a disagreement around X, or whatever it is. And so what you're doing is you're a bit of an artist trying to work out, like you're like a political scientist trying to work out what's their interest, what's going on here. And one feedback you often might get is one community feels less favoured or more favoured as opposed to another community, and those differences. And it's because there's an exchange of power happening, whether you realise it or not, because if you're a central organisation, people go, oh, well, you've got access to power, you've got access to politicians, the media, resources. We want to be closer to that. And somebody else is like, we're a bit further away. So that is something I'd also always say, be like really mindful of that dynamic. I'd be really interested in hearing from Susie if she thought that was relevant or not in any of the work that she's done. But like that's something that I've always found to be true.
Interesting, and not necessarily what I expected you to say, Sotes. That's great. Susie?
No, I completely concur with what Sotes has just said. And if you don't handle that properly, you can end up dividing the community. So it really is a very sensitive, nuanced thing that Sotes has mentioned. I think from my perspective, when I have gone around trying to engage the community, I have noticed that individuals are very siloed according to their cultural background. I've also found that there is a lot of apathy when it comes to trying to do something about a particular problem. So there's a lot of people moaning, but not a lot of people wanting to take any action. And I guess that's because they don't feel empowered. So one of the big issues is that generally people don't like the people that have the power, for example, the council, and you have to try and change mindsets into understanding that everyone is trying to achieve the same thing. We just have to work together to try and get there. And that's a huge mountain to climb with members of the community. I had a nice small win, relatively small win, where I was able to get the community together because it had nothing to do with cultural differences, nothing to do with what layer you're in society, how much money you've got, nothing to do with that. It was simply saving a raised bed, and we got the mayor down and she was planting stuff, and that became like a celebrity moment because not very many people get to actually physically see their mayor. And so, that became a moment where a lot of people who are very diverse came together and saw something that was of common interest. And from there, you then plant the seed of other things that you could tackle. You're always going to get those elements of the group that are not interested because they've got much bigger fish to fry in their lives. And then you're going to get the other side of it where there are people that are gung-ho activists, let's go and do something, and everybody in between. So your challenge then is how to keep the momentum going over a long period of time. And that then becomes a creativity issue, an engagement issue that, that we've spoken about previously. That's how I feel about that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Susie. I'm going to end the Q&A section there for time, and just as a kind of quick fire round, ask you guys, and hopefully you've been prepared for this one in advance. For people who'd like to learn more about this, could you recommend one thing that they should read or watch or listen to? Emily.
So this may be no surprise to people, but I'm going to recommend that people go and watch the video, the Breaking Ground video, because it's brilliant. I love how kind of it gives a really joyful and inspiring glimpse into community-led action and what can be achieved when people come together. And it's really relatable and really accessible. So a bit of kind of self-promotion, but I would recommend everyone goes to watch that.
Thank you, Emily. Susie.
Coming from the community, I don't necessarily have lots of knowledge, etc., on climate action and environmental issues. So what I would recommend is there is somebody on Instagram called the Climate Conversation, Convo Prof, a lady called Dr. Huckster, and she has a lot of videos that answer the questions that you face when you're talking to individuals in the community who are maybe, denying the climate action issue, or you don't have the snappy or educated or empirically based responses that you need to be able to answer questions on the environment, etc. And this lady has compiled a load of videos that really help you to do that. So I would recommend her.
Brilliant. Could you just give us her name one more time, Susie?
Yes, so it's a lady called Dr. Huckster, and her Instagram page is called the Climate Convo Prof.
Great, thank you. Maybe we can sneak a link into the chat before we close as well. Thank you, Susie. Sotes, to you.
Speak to somebody under the age of 10 who is not a member of your family. So like increasingly, it's children that are genuinely changing how parents think about the climate, what they care about, They're basically disruptors in your home. They're also changing the world of philanthropy, how people give money towards issues and stuff like that. And so it is quite a powerful thing to speak to young people, like really young people, because they're starting to perceive the world in a very different way, and that is the world that will happen. So, I think that is what I would recommend for people to do.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sophus. So I want to say thank you to all of our panelists. I mean, I feel like I've learned a huge amount today. I hope everyone watching feels that they've taken something away from this as well. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing your experience, knowledge, expertise with us. There's like a lot to dig through there today. So this has been the fourth in our series of breakfast events. About engaging the public, changing behaviour around sustainability. You might have come to some others. If you haven't already, if you sign up to our newsletter via the link in the chat, you'll hear about any future events if you've enjoyed this one. And we're going to follow up with a recording of this session and the newsletter link as well, so you can stay up to date with news, events, campaign launches, and so on. We'll include links to Susie and Sophus's work as well, so you can continue to follow what they do. So I think it just remains for me to say thank you to everyone for joining us today. We hope that you feel inspired. We hope that you have learned something that you can apply in your work or your day-to-day life. And I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Thank you very much.